He was a Roman soldier, then he was a soldier in Carthage, he was a soldier in the French army, or so many such births. And in every birth, he was a soldier or a military man. So when he was born, he was a born soldier. So the blood, it was there in his, from his sanskars, from his previous life, from many lives. Someone like Beethoven, or take the example of some other musician like that, with extraordinary genius in composing things. It is said Beethoven could compose a whole composition at one shot. It appeared to him like a screenshot. He just, one shot, he had this whole thing composed. How did that happen? Born musician. So if this can happen on the material platform, why is it not possible on a spiritual platform, on a devotional platform? And people surely nowadays, devoid of spiritual knowledge, would want their children to be something like this. They would want their children to be born footballers or born musicians or whatever, you see. But we as devotees, what do we want the newly borns to be everywhere? Born devotees. So how do we make them born devotees? What makes somebody a born devotee, and why is it that somebody is born like that? Why is it that somebody comes to Krishna consciousness a little later? Why is it somebody doesn't come despite so much endeavor? What is the reason? So we see there is a history. So why someone comes to Krishna consciousness and why someone doesn't? One can understand different criteria, different points that we can consider. One is the time before conception. The person, that jiva, that living entity has a history of previous lives. In those previous lives, that entity has accumulated a lot of samskaras. What is samskaras? Samskaras are nothing but impressions on the consciousness, on the chitta. Just like you have footprints on wet cement, let's say. So they are very visible. And then when the cement dries up, then they remain permanently imprinted there. But so long as it is wet, still some change can be made in that. Once it dries, it's hard. So these things remain imprinted in the consciousness for lives together, life after life after life. And this actually forms our svabhava, our nature, with which we are born. So this is one very important criterion that determines our nature, our personality, and in specifically whether we become a devotee of Krishna or not, and how serious as devotees do we become, or are we lukewarm devotees. The second happens from the point of conception, roughly up to the age of 5 years of, that is, or after conception, that is, and then leading up to, say, 5 years, the whole period of the pregnancy, and the first 5 years, which are considered especially very sensitive, where the child is especially impressionable. So many inputs the child gets, some scars, sights, sounds and smells. And that forms the character, the personality, the mentality, the thoughts, especially the inclinations of the child. And the third is after that. Of course, you could subdivide that stage also. But once they enter into the teens, then the whirlpool starts. The madness starts. Very difficult period. The hormones are acting up. Your exposure to the outside world, the senses are getting agitated. Everything goes haywire, topsy-turvy. Very difficult period. So at that time also there are very strong impressions. And the later you come to Krishna consciousness, the harder it is. So we see in the instance of Prahlad, he was, of course, instructed in his mother's womb. But I mentioned this little story at the Gurukul, that when Hiranyakashipu had gone into the forest to perform austerities, and the sages like Narada had come, being worried that he would perform austerities and get extremely powerful, so they wanted to disturb his meditation. So they sat on a tree in the form of birds and chanted the names of Narayan. And naturally, Hiranyakashipu wasn't amused. He wasn't happy at all. And he was irritated, annoyed. And then he tried to shoo away the birds, but the birds would come back. So finally he came back frustrated. He gave up his attempts to perform austerities. And his wife Kayadu asked him, what happened? You were supposed to be away for 10,000 years or whatever it was. And you came back so early. He said, yeah, what to do? There were these birds, and they kept chanting Narayan, Narayan. So she was devotionally inclined, so she took the opportunity. What did she say? Yeah, they said Narayan, Narayan. No, I didn't hear. What did he say? So she kept getting the name of Narayan from his mouth, and that is when the conception happened, and there was Prahlad. So sometimes we see that even in cases where the families are, or the father or mother, especially the father, maybe demoniac, you may still get some devotee child, a very fabulous devotee. And there are so many such examples. Sometimes they happen by Krishna's arrangement. Krishna places them. Mahaprabhu has placed them in different parts of the world to send us a message that devotional service transcends all these material designations like caste, creed, community, nationality, etc. And then after that, Prahlad heard Srimad Bhagavatam in his mother's womb. So that was doubly, triply reinforced. And then when he was a born devotee. Born, literally born devotee. But to be born a devotee, you have to have devotional impressions before that and before that. So in the earlier verses here, Srila Prabhupada speaks, I want to quote that. The word abhijatasya, in reference to one born of transcendental qualities or godly tendencies, is very significant. To beget a child in a godly atmosphere is known in the Vedic scriptures as the Garbhadhana Samskar. If the parents want a child in the godly qualities, they should follow the 10 principles recommended for the social life of the human being. So that Garbhadhana Samskar has many other aspects, but essentially it's the process of preparing oneself mentally, physically, spiritually, and beckoning the grace of Krishna, and through that to beckon or bring a suitable devotee soul who is looking for some nice devotee parents. Because when people do devotional service, they don't always complete their devotional service in that life. It may be incomplete, in which case they may go to the heavenly planets and then they have to take birth again, or they may directly have to take birth in a devotee family. So there are these souls looking for appropriate parents. I want devotee parents. I don't want to be born in some other family. So then the to-be parents now are beckoning to Krishna, please send us this nice jiva who is a great devotee of yours. So then the souls, by Krishna's arrangement, the appropriate soul is then sent. So that's the beginning of the born devotee. And then after that, then especially the role of the family comes in, and the mother in particular, to give a lot of devotional samskars to the child. And it's nice if at this time the mother especially is not disturbed, doesn't read the newspaper or see the television, especially no gossip. Whenever you see any pregnant lady, don't go and gossip to her anything. Okay? Don't gossip. Do you know what happened there to this devotee said this? Don't say that. Just talk to her about Krishna. And she shouldn't be exposed even to all sorts of sights and sounds and smells of the outside world. As far as possible, temple, devotee, home, that's it. As much Krishna consciousness as possible. Should be always cheerful, pleasant, no arguments, no quarrels at home. Very nice, loving atmosphere, happy, jolly, chanting the Bhagavad Gita, chanting the holy names, worshipping the deities, and then see what kind of child. And then till the age of 5, that's very, very impressionable. So born devotees will come like that. Sometimes, not sometimes, always, because karma is so complicated. Gahana karmano gatihi. Very difficult to understand the ways in which bad and good karma are intertwined and how transcendental sukriti is enmeshed in that. Very difficult to say. So some people manifest their devotional qualities right at birth, like Prahlad did, and some may manifest it a little later, some much later, depending on all these factors that I mentioned earlier. And sometimes even at the end of life. And sometimes we have extraordinary cases of devotees or people becoming devotees from most improbable backgrounds. So we can understand by various reasons, including, let's say, their past life, some scars of their past life. So I thought, to illustrate these points, I'll tell you a few stories. Yes, now everybody's face lights up, yeah? If I tell you I'm going to do a lot of heavy philosophy, then everybody thinks, yes. And these are stories, you may be surprised to know, is of Muslim devotees of Krishna. Some very famous Muslim devotees of Krishna, which goes to show that the fact that these people became such exalted devotees, at least some of them were exalted devotees and some of them were just devotees and they had a lot of fascination for Krishna. It's not to do with their upbringing in some cases. So it obviously has to do with the previous life. So they had that strong sanskar in the previous life, somehow or the other, by some stroke of good fortune, unknowingly performed Garbhadhan samskar or some semblance of Garbhadhan samskar by the parents. The child is got in, born of such and such parents. We cannot sometimes fathom it, we cannot figure it out. I'll start with a devotee called Ras Khan. How many of you have heard of Ras Khan? Ras Khan. Now his name was, I think, Ibrahim Khan or Sayyid or something like that. He was probably of some Turkish ancestry. His ancestry was Turkish. He was born in a wealthy family somewhere near Delhi in about around the time, a little later, after Chaitanya Mahaprabhu departed from this world, or maybe around that time. And he, from a sophisticated landlord, wealthy Muslim family, so he was educated in Persian and Sanskrit also. He was quite well versed in Sanskrit. And as he moved on, he became fascinated with because he was learned, he was scholarly, he tried to study the Vedic Hindu scriptures and he also studied the Srimad Bhagavatam. So he became fascinated. And he grew up and the fascination continued, but nothing very striking. He is one of the very popular poets of the medieval age. He wrote mostly in a language called Brajabhasha. Brajabhasha is the language of Braj, of Vrindavan. It's a colloquial dialect. And he wrote in that. And his works are mostly about Bal Leela of Krishna, the childhood pastimes, Chir Haran Leela, the pastime in which Krishna steals the clothes of the gopis, or about Ras Leela, and about various other pastimes of Krishna and the gopis. And also he glorified the love of Radharani and Krishna, and spoke about the futility, the uselessness of all other sorts of even spiritual practices or religious practices, unless one achieves that kind of love of Vrindavan. So he was a great proponent and believer in the love of Vrindavan. And that's what his poems and songs are all about. Rasakhan Rachanavali and Sujan Rasakhan and Prema Vatika, is some famous books like this, written mostly in the Braj Bhasha. So there are different stories about how he became a devotee like this, and how it is that he came and lived in Vrindavan for the rest of his life. Once he came to Vrindavan, he never left Vrindavan. He remained there till he passed away. And his samadhi still exists in Gokul Mahavan near Brahmanda Ghat. Brahmanda Ghat is a place on the banks of the Yamuna where it is said that Krishna ate dirt. You know, all know that pastime of Krishna eating dirt, and Mother Yashoda asking him to open his mouth. So that's Brahmanda Ghat. So he lived in Braj, and ultimately he departed from this world there, and his samadhi is still there. So there are different accounts of how it is that he came to Vrindavan. One book talks about him having a Sufi teacher. Sufis are basically mystic Muslims. They are Shias, but a little mystically oriented. So you find a lot of them in India. They're mystical, not like the ordinary religious people, but they dance, they sing, So many similarities to devotees. But I think they're impersonal, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not sure about that. So he came to Vrindavan one time, and then he became so fascinated he didn't want to leave after that. There's another episode, a narration about him. It says that he fell in love with one beautiful lady who was very haughty, very proud. And every time he expressed his affection for her, she would insult him. So he was naturally not happy. And then he read the Srimad Bhagavatam. And he had translated the Srimad Bhagavatam from Sanskrit into Persian. So probably the first Persian translation. I don't know if BBT has a Persian translation, I'm sure they do. At least a Bhagavad Gita. But Bhagavatam originally was translated by Rasakhan. He was still not known as Rasakhan. He was Ibrahim Sayyid. So then he read in the Srimad Bhagavatam about the extraordinary love of the gopis for Krishna. And he said, my God, what am I doing with my life? Look at this. I want to go there. I'm just getting abused every time. Every time this lady is refusing my love, and she's insulting me. But just look at this. And he was so fascinated by that he decided to go to Vrindavan. And he went to Vrindavan and he didn't come back. There was no looking back after that. So this is second story. There's another third story, probably from a book by a Vaishnava scholar called Hari Rai. I forget the name of the book, maybe Bhav Prakash or something like that. So Hari Rai says that this Ibrahim Sayyid in Delhi, when he lived, he developed this utterly strange fascination and kind of attachment to this little boy who was a son of a Hindu merchant. He was completely besotted with him, infatuated with this little boy. And he was completely unconcerned about what other people would think. he would sit and watch this little boy all day. And wherever the boy went, he would follow. All day long, this happened. In fact, it went to such a degree that he would even eat the remnants of the food that this boy ate. He would go and eat from that plate, whatever was remaining, this boy's food. And naturally, everybody was aghast and they would criticize him like anything. The Hindus criticized him a lot. Hey, what are you doing here? Go away. And the Muslims criticized him. And they said, he's an infidel, he's a kafir, he's, look at it, what he's doing. He's becoming attached to a Hindu boy. And whenever they came to protest to him, because he was quite, it is said, big and powerful, so whenever he came and they tried to reprimand him, he would threaten them, I'll beat you to pulp if you dare interfere. So they would all go away. Nobody had the courage to come up, but the whole society was slandering him like anything. And he was least concerned. And whenever people told him, just see how everybody's criticizing you, and he would say, I am what I am. And then one day, there were two Vaishnavas standing nearby. And one of the Vaishnavas was telling the other Vaishnava, he said, one should become attached to Krishna like Ibrahim Sayyed is attached to that little boy. And so when the other Vaishnava heard it, he turned his nose up in disgust, as if to indicate that he didn't approve of Ibrahim Sayyed. Ibrahim Sayyed was in earshot, so he heard that and he became furious. So he drew out his sword and he approached the two Vaishnavas, and they were trembling in fear. So then they said, no, it's like this. If you just had the attachment to Krishna that you have for this little boy, you would become liberated from material existence. So he said, who is this Krishna? What are you talking? He still had the sword in hand. Who is this Krishna? What are you talking about? So this one devotee had a picture of Krishna from Vrindavan. Took out his picture. See, this is Krishna. You become attached to him, and then you'll forget everything. You'll forget this little boy. So he said, where can I find him? He said, well, Vrindavan. Go to Vrindavan and you'll find him there. And what if he isn't there? I'll come back for you. Yes, you'll find him there. Go there. So then he immediately left for Vrindavan. And when he left, he came to the temple of Krishna there. And they didn't allow him in because he was a Muslim. He must have been looking like a Muslim. So they didn't allow him in. So 3 days he was sitting outside. There was this little lake outside the temple. And he was sitting there fasting. He didn't have food for 3 days. And finally one account goes in the Vallabha Sampradaya literature that Krishna appeared to him and he called him as Ras Khan. He didn't call him as Ibrahim, whatever. He called him as Ras Khan. As you know, the word Ras means transcendental mellow, right? Vatsalya Ras, Madhurya Ras. It's a certain kind of taste derived from a certain type of emotion. So just like you have a love for your child, is one rasa. You have a love for your friend, it's another rasa. It's love, but it's of a different flavor, different taste. So the word we are interested in Bhakti Rasa, not the rasa of this world. So Krishna gave the name Ras Khan, Ras meaning transcendental mellow, and Khan, the word Khan means a mine, just like a gold mine or a diamond mine. So here he named him as a mine of transcendental mellow. And then Krishna was very pleased with him and he said, you stay. And after that, Rasa Khan never looked back. He continued to stay there. In the Vallabha Sampradaya literature, it is said that he took Diksha from Vittalnath Goswami, who was the son of Vallabhacharya. So Vittalnath Goswami accepted him as a disciple, didn't see his birth, that he's from a Muslim family, but understood that this was something special here going on. And then after that, he instructed him to remain in Braj. And he remained in Braj, and he was completely enamored of Krishna. He fell in love with Krishna and he completely forgot that little boy. And he became such a spontaneous devotee that he would burst forth into song. As we see in the case of many great devotees, they would spontaneously burst forth into song. So music and bhakti have a lot in common. Because bhakti, the transcendental emotion in the heart, automatically comes out in the form of song. See? And it's in the form of verse. So many of these great songs, of these great devotees, were spontaneous poets. So Rasa Khan also wrote these couplets. Couplet meaning 2 lines in Braj Bhasha. They are called doha in India. So many others have written, like Surdas, Tulsidas, also called doha. So he began to write exquisite couplets about the pastimes of Krishna, the feelings of the gopis for Krishna, and all of that. And it is not possible that he could just have developed it in this life. It's something extraordinary, out of this world. Why Krishna arranged that this person be born in a Muslim family and live for so many years outside, and then he suddenly becomes a devotee of this caliber, just spontaneously absorbed in Krishna consciousness, living in Vrindavan without caring for anything else of the world. Extraordinary, Rasa Khan. So those of you who go to Vrindavan, you may see, and especially if you go to Brahmanda Ghat, you ask about him, and you will see Rasa Khan there, and you will hear many things about him. One of his poems, for example, a more popular one, he says that if I were ever to be born again as a human, I want to be born as a cowherd in Braj. If I were to be born as an animal, I want to be born as a cow in Nanda Maharaj's herd in Braj. If I were to be born as a bird, I want to be a bird in the boughs of the Kadamba trees on the banks of the Yamuna in Braj. If I were to be born as a stone, I would rather be born as one of the little stones on Govardhan Hill. So this was his sentiment. And he also wrote many verses extolling and trying to analyze the love between the gopis and Krishna. And he would forever decry everything else of this world because he understood that all else was completely insignificant in comparison to this treasure of love, of Braja Prem. So this was the extraordinary story of Ras Khan. There's another Muslim devotee who comes to mind, and that is Rahim. And he also wrote dohas, these couplets. He was also called Rahim Das. And he was one of the ministers, strangely enough, in the court of the King Akbar, who was a very famous king. And he had 9 very famous ministers, one of whom was Birbal. You heard his name, Birbal. And Rahim was another one of them. Navaratna, 9 gems of the court of Akbar. He was known as Abdur Rahim, and Akbar gave him the title Khane Khana. So he was known as Abdur Rahim Khane Khana. He was actually the son of, one of these very aristocratic Turkish type of people who came, and then his mother was from India, from a Rajput clan who had been converted to Islam some generations ago. And then both his father and mother died, and he was adopted by the second queen, a wife of his father, and she later married Akbar, so he became also a stepson of Akbar. So he lived in the court. He was absorbed in the world of diplomacy and statesmanship and military stuff, and he was a general and so on. It is said that one time he was planning to set out on a campaign to defeat a great Rajput king called Rana Pratap. And somehow Rana Pratap's son captured the women folk of Abdur Rahim Khan's family, and he brought them before Maharana Pratap. And Rana Pratap was aghast, and he admonished his son. He said, "How dare you capture the women folk and bring them here? Take them back to Abdur Rahim and take them with dignity and keep them and take them back to their home." And Abdur Rahim Khana was very touched by this gesture and the nobility of Rana Pratap, and he, after that, decided he called off his campaign. He didn't go against Rana Pratap. So he wrote many songs. He also became fascinated by Krishna. And he would forever try to hear about Krishna, and he wrote many nice poems. His poems are also Doha. Rahim songs are also full of the pining of Braj. Very strange how living in that, how come? How come he became a devotee? Abhijatasya Pandav, you're born with divine qualities. So obviously there is something from some previous life. Why Krishna placed him in such a family, and then he exhibited devotion of such high caliber, just like Rasa Khan did. It's something we can't understand. But it means that Krishna wants to show that devotion to Krishna is something completely transcendental. It is not connected to, which community we come from, which language we speak, even what religious faith we profess. It is something beyond that, completely spiritual. And therefore people from all these other faiths and so on, and they also became devotees like this. Actually, in the end, as far as I know, he opposed the son of Akbar, Salim, who became known as Jahangir, coming to the throne. So Jahangir killed his two sons, and then he imprisoned him, or something happened. So he didn't have a very nice old age, but his devotion to Krishna, he would write. It is said about Rahim that he was very humble, and when he gave in charity, then he would always bow his head down. He would never look at the person he was giving charity to. So the famous Ram Bhakta Tulsidas, you heard of Tulsidas, right? He wrote the famous Ramcharitmanas. So he heard about this practice. So he wrote him a couplet. He wrote him a letter with a couplet. He was a poet himself.